영어 동화 세상 리틀팍스
QT's Science Adventures Chapter 1 Alert! Earthquake!
I don't get this.
Will Jacobs grumbled as he tried to do his fourth grade science homework. His mother stepped into the doorway and asked,
Will, are you done with your homework? It's almost time for bed.
No, I'm still trying to answer these questions. I just don't understand earthquakes. How can the earth shake?
Why don't you take a little break?
Will's mom suggested.
That sometimes helps.
After his mom left, Will set an alarm on his phone. He had just gotten it for his birthday and he loved the new gadget. Will put his head down on the desk and instantly fell asleep. Soon the alarm went off, making the table vibrate. Will silenced it, ignoring the message on the phone's screen. Wake up! He went back to sleep, only to be woken up again by another vibration. But this time, when Will opened his eyes, he wasn't in his room. He was in a dark, long cave, and the phone wasn't vibrating. The ground was shaking.
Whoa!
Thought Will.
What's going on?
A voice nearby squeaked.
Alert! Earthquake!
Will looked around but didn't see anyone. Then, he spotted a patch of light on the ground. He looked closer and saw that it was his phone. The voice came from the device. Will picked up the phone, mumbling to himself.
This is strange. Phones can't talk.
Most phones don't talk, but I am a QT9000.
He almost dropped it again when the phone replied.
I can talk and do much more. I'm the smartest phone you'll ever have. You can call me QT.
Wow!
Will exclaimed.
Can you tell me what's happening? Where am I?
My sensors indicate that we are in a cave, and we just experienced a small earthquake,
replied QT. All of a sudden, the ground started shaking again.
And this is a big earthquake,
QT said as a whole section of the rock wall moved. Will noticed light coming through a crack in the ceiling.
I'm getting out of here,
he said, stuffing the phone in his pocket. He climbed out to the surface. Nearby, a road had torn in half. Will pulled his phone out and asked,
How can a huge part of the ground move like that?
A map of the world appeared on QT's screen.
The surface of the planet, called the crust, is made up of chunks called tectonic plates. There are 12 large plates and many smaller ones,
QT explained.
The plates float on top of the mantle, a soft layer of rock and other materials. Underneath the mantle is a layer of liquid metal called the outer core, and underneath that is the inner core, which is solid metal. It's very hot at the center of the planet, and the heat escaping from there makes the plates move. The movement is what causes earthquakes,
said QT.
Oh.
Will thought for a moment and then asked,
If the plates are constantly moving, why aren't earthquakes happening all the time?
Actually, they are. Most are just so small that people don't feel them. Big earthquakes, like this one, happen when friction stops the edges of the plates from moving for a while. When they finally break loose, they release all that stored energy like a spring.
QT paused for a second.
My GPS tells me that we are on the San Andreas Fault in California.
Will's eyes lit up.
We learned about faults in science class. A fault is the crack between two plates in the planet's crust.
Will looked at the road again.
That must be a fault over there.
Yes, it is. Two plates are sliding past each other here, causing powerful earthquakes. Faults also often appear by mountains. That's because when two plates come together, their edges can wrinkle and fold to make mountains.
Will scratched his head.
What happens when plates move apart? Do huge holes appear in the ground?
No. Right now, the places where plates are moving apart are mostly under the ocean. Down there, magma, that's hot liquid rock, rises from between the plates. It cools when it touches the cold water, so it hardens and becomes part of the crust.
QT explained.
Earthquakes can be very destructive. If that road over there is destroyed, just imagine what can happen in a city during an earthquake. Actually, I'll show you.
How? We're nowhere near a city.
Will pointed out.
Look at my screen and I'll transport us. I told you I have special skills.
Will gazed down at the screen and saw a street in ruins. Then, everything got dark. A moment later, Will found himself in the city. He was standing in a crowded park. Will was shocked by the destruction around him.
I'd better stay here, away from the buildings. My science teacher said that aftershocks always come after a big earthquake, but we don't know when. It's dangerous because more parts of the buildings could fall. But where are we?
Asked Will.
This is San Francisco after a magnitude 6.9 earthquake.
QT replied.
The earthquake's epicenter was actually about 100 kilometers away, but you can see how much power it released.
Will looked confused.
What's an epicenter? And what does magnitude mean?
Earthquakes start deep underground. The spot on the surface of the planet above the earthquake is called its epicenter. Magnitude is the strength of an earthquake. Each point on the magnitude scale is 10 times stronger than the one before, so an 8-point earthquake is 10 times stronger than a 7-point. Can you imagine damage 10 times worse than this?
Will shook his head.
No, this is pretty bad. How do they measure magnitude? Do they count the buildings that fell or something?
A jagged line appeared on QT's screen.
People who study earthquakes are called seismologists. They measure earthquakes with machines called seismographs, which monitor the vibrations in the ground. Usually, the Earth doesn't move much, so the waves the seismographs draw are pretty small. But during an earthquake, the waves get really big. The size of the waves determines the magnitude.
Suddenly, the aftershock came. The ground rumbled and then moved. Terrified, Will shut his eyes. When the sound passed, he slowly opened his eyes. To his amazement, he was back in his room. His phone was vibrating in his hand. The alarm was going off.
That was a strange dream.
He muttered, reaching for his pencil.
But QT sure is cool. And now these homework questions will be a piece of cake.
QT's Science Adventures. Chapter 2. Deep Beneath the Ocean.
Stop that.
Will tried to protect his goldfish from Tish, the family cat.
Silly cat. Those fish aren't a snack, and I have to study.
He turned back to his science textbook and yawned.
This is boring,
he murmured, pushing away his homework.
Isn't the ocean just water anyway? I'm so tired.
Will glanced at the time on his phone, set an alarm for 10 minutes later, and crawled into bed. He immediately fell asleep and started to dream. Will found himself inside a submarine, floating in the middle of nowhere.
Wow. Where am I, QT?
He said, picking up his phone.
My GPS indicates that we're floating in the western Pacific Ocean.
QT responded.
See?
Wow, that's a lot of water.
Will commented.
Almost 3/4 of Earth is covered by water. The Pacific, Atlantic, Indian, Arctic, and Southern Oceans. But they're connected into one world ocean because water moves all around,
QT explained. Will peered at the map on QT's screen.
The continents seem so small.
They're bigger than they look,
QT said.
Wait a second, and I'll take control of the ship.
A beam of light shot from QT to the submarine's controls, and the ship began moving.
You can do that? Wow!
Will exclaimed.
I sure can. Right now, we're over a strip around the continents called the continental shelf. It can extend 400 kilometers from the coast, but it's not steep, so the water is usually 140 meters at its deepest.
Colorful tropical reefs and lots of animals live in this area.
Will said, remembering something he had read in his textbook.
That's right.
QT said.
Then the ground gets steeper. We call this section of the continents the continental slope. It goes all the way to the ocean floor.
The submarine descended quickly, startling Will.
Where are we going?
Down.
QT answered.
But I've got to turn on the lights. Sunlight doesn't penetrate very far into the water. The top layer of the ocean, the sunlight zone, is only 200 meters deep. In this zone, there's enough light for plants to survive. The fish and mammals that live here feed on the plants and...
Each other?
Will guessed.
Right. As you go deeper into the twilight zone, it grows dimmer and dimmer. Not enough light for plants. So the creatures that live here usually have huge eyes to help them see. And they tend to come up to the sunlight zone to feed at night when predators can't see them.
QT explained.
That's where we are now, right? It's pretty dark here.
Then Will noticed something enormous in the distance.
What's that? It's getting closer fast.
Uh-oh. That's a giant squid. They live here feeding on fish and smaller squid. It probably thinks we're lunch.
Just as the giant squid was about to wrap its tentacles around the submarine, QT turned the boat sharply and they sped away.
Phew,
said Will.
As I was saying,
QT continued.
by 1,000 meters deep, there's no light. That's the start of the midnight zone.
Will nodded.
this must be it.
Then he spied something surprising.
Lights!
Many species have adapted to life without sunlight. Some create their own light to attract mates or prey or confuse predators.
QT turned off the lights and a fish with huge teeth swam by. It had what looked like a fishing pole coming out of its head, with a light on the top.
That's weird. What is it?
Will asked.
An anglerfish. It attracts food with that light.
After the fish swam away, QT flashed the submarine's lights. Thousands of lights flashed back. Will was amazed.
Wow! That's a lot of anglerfish.
And some squid, some shrimp-like species, and other creatures. We're approaching the ocean floor now. The ocean floor starts about 4,000 meters below the surface, but it can go as deep as 6,000 meters.
QT turned the lights back on and a vast plain appeared before them. It was dotted with mountains.
It looks a lot like the land above water. Most of it is flat, but there are also mountains and valleys. Those little mountains are called seamounts. If they become big enough to reach the surface, their name changes to islands.
Cool.
Will exclaimed. Then he noticed something else.
What are those tubes with the black stuff erupting out of them?
They're called black smokers.
QT said.
They release toxic gases and hot water from underground. For a long time, people thought nothing could live down here, but they were wrong.
QT shined a bright light near one of the smokers, and they saw fish and crabs swimming among long white tubes with red tips.
Those are tube worms. They actually get their energy from those toxic substances. But let's look behind us, too.
As the submarine turned, the ocean floor dropped away. QT said,
That's the Mariana Trench, a huge valley. Its deepest part is the Challenger Deep, at 11,000 meters under the surface. But life exists even there. Let's go see.
As they floated over the edge, they heard a creak. Worried, Will asked,
What was that?
QT ran a safety check of the submarine, and danger appeared on the phone's screen. But QT sounded calm.
Our submarine made that noise. We are under extreme pressure down here, and the weight of all the water above us is pressing on the boat. We shouldn't go much deeper. We don't want to get squished and...
But before QT could finish, the submarine window cracked. A stream of water shot inside, splashing Will. He woke with a start and saw the cat jump away from the fishbowl, shaking its wet paw.
Tish, stay away from that fishbowl.
Will went to his desk.
Oceans aren't boring. They're awesome,
He thought, quickly filling in a worksheet. Before long, he crawled back into bed, this time for the night. QT's Science Adventures, Chapter 3, The End of the Dinosaurs. Will was riding back to school from a field trip to a museum,
The Tyrannosaurus was amazing!
said Bobby, Will's best friend.
It was scary.
Will said. He looked at a photo he'd taken of the dinosaur skeleton with his phone and then glanced at their homework.
Do you know the answer to number 5? Why did dinosaurs disappear?
He asked Bobby.
Let's answer these questions before we forget everything. Or before I fall asleep. Buses make me tired.
Will tried to focus on the worksheet, but soon his eyes were closed and his head was bobbing up and down with every bump in the road. When Will opened his eyes, he wasn't on the bus anymore. He was in an aircraft, flying slowly over a strange landscape. QT, his phone, spoke.
Scientists think the world looked like this in the late Triassic, the period from about 250 to 200 million years ago.
Huh? When?
Will said.
This airship is carrying us through time. Scientists talk about Earth's history using a special scale called Geologic Time. See that display? It tells us what period of time we're seeing. Experts think dinosaurs, like those over there, appeared during the Triassic. But let's travel forward into the next period, when dinosaurs thrived.
QT shined a light at the controls, taking over. The display changed as the scenery outside shimmered and transformed.
So this is the Jurassic?
Will asked.
Yes, it lasted until about 150 million years ago. Some dinosaurs became gigantic, as you can see. Let's skip forward into the next period, the Cretaceous. At the end of the Cretaceous, 70% of the species on Earth died, including most dinosaurs.
Will nodded.
We learned that at the museum. But what made them disappear?
Well, scientists have some theories, but they can't prove them. One clue is an unusual layer of rock found all over the world. It's about 65 million years old and contains a lot of iridium, an element that's usually rare on Earth's surface. It's normally located deep inside the planet or in space in some asteroids. This layer of rock led to two popular theories about what caused the extinction.
QT announced.
Here we are, the end of the Cretaceous, 65 million years ago.
The sky was dark, and they were hovering over a field of volcanoes.
There's so much lava.
Will said.
We are over India.
QT said.
Some scientists believe these volcanoes contributed to the extinction because they could have brought iridium to Earth's surface in lava. The volcanoes might have released enough ash and gases, which then blew around the whole planet, to create a greenhouse effect, trapping heat in the atmosphere. A warmer climate would have made it hard for many species to survive.
Wow.
Will whispered, watching a dinosaur flee from the glowing hot rock.
But there is another possibility. Let me transport us to another part of the planet.
QT said. The ocean appeared on the phone's screen, and the world went pitch black. When it became light again, their aircraft was hovering high over a body of water. QT continued.
Some scientists think a huge asteroid about 10 kilometers across hit Earth near Mexico 65 million years ago.
A giant rock flew through the air. Will yelled,
Is that the asteroid?
Yes, scientists are pretty sure it hit Earth, but they can only guess what happened next.
The aircraft shook as the asteroid crashed into Earth. QT went on,
The asteroid might have created a huge fireball, and then tsunamis. As hot pieces of the asteroid fell back to Earth, they could have started wildfires worldwide. So at first, the temperature of the world would have increased.
The aircraft flew closer to the ground, along the shore. Will stared at the destruction caused by the asteroid.
How long did this take?
No one knows exactly. Maybe weeks or months. After the fires, dust from the explosion might have blocked light from reaching Earth's surface. In the following years, plants which need light to make food would have died. Then, plant-eating dinosaurs would have starved and died. And then the meat-eating dinosaurs would have starved and died too.
How do we know that?
Will asked.
We can guess when species lived based on their fossils, and what layer of rock we find those fossils in. The species that went extinct don't appear in rocks formed after 65 million years ago.
Will thought about everything QT had said.
But scientists aren't sure whether the volcanoes or the asteroid caused the dinosaur extinction?
It's possible both contributed. There are other factors and theories too.
QT replied.
For instance, some people think mammals ate so many dinosaur eggs that dinosaurs couldn't survive. And we're not sure whether dinosaurs died suddenly. They could have been dying off gradually before the volcanoes or asteroid became a problem.
QT paused, and the scenery outside began to transform.
We've jumped forward just a few years. See all those animals? Many mammals, frogs, crocodiles, and even some species of dinosaurs survived the extinction, but we don't know why.
Will remembered the ferocious-looking Tyrannosaurus at the museum and shuddered.
Did some dinosaurs survive into modern times?
Well, scientists are pretty sure birds evolved from dinosaurs, so technically they are dinosaurs. And modern crocodiles aren't dinosaurs, but they are very similar to the crocodiles that were alive 65 million years ago.
QT said. Suddenly, something rose out of the water. Its jaws snapped shut on the tail of the aircraft.
No!
Will shut his eyes, expecting the crocodile to pull them underwater. The aircraft shook and then was still. Will peeked and realized that the bus had jolted to a stop in front of the school.
Wake up!
Bobby said.
I hope you had a nice nap.
I had the strangest dream about dinosaurs. I don't think I'll ever forget the stuff I learned today.
Will said.